What if I told you that Blake Lively's own co-star just got slammed in court, while a whistleblower tied to her inner circle has been thrown under the bus in the most brutal way possible? This is not just another Hollywood headline. This is a story of power control and betrayal, and the shocking twists will leave you speechless, because what you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni, and the secret war that's tearing Hollywood apart. The courtroom has become the stage of a spectacle no one in Hollywood could have predicted. And at the center of it all stands Isabella Faraher, a young actress caught in the crossfire of a legal battle far bigger than herself, her name suddenly echoing through filings, headlines, and whispered conversations, because what seemed like just another procedural step has now exploded into a dramatic twist that reveals how high the stakes really are and how far each side is willing to go to claim victory. And when the judge issued his ruling, it sent shockwaves not just through the lawyers and litigants, but through the entire Hollywood system. Because Isabella thought she could sidestep the storm, thought she could fade into the background of this chaos, but instead she has been thrust into the spotlight as the symbol of resistance, defiance, and ultimately, the unwilling pawn of a war between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, a war that seems to grow darker with each passing day. It began with what should have been a simple question. Can Isabella avoid the subpoena that demands her testimony? A subpoena that could force her to open the door to secrets no one wants unearthed. Her lawyers argued she should be removed. Her camp begged for sanctions. They painted her as unfairly targeted, as someone being dragged into something beyond her control. Yet the judge cut through the noise with a decision that was devastating for Isabella, but a quiet win for Justin, because the court said no, you cannot escape this. The subpoena stands, no sanctions will protect you. No shortcut will allow you to vanish into thin air. And what makes this ruling even more chilling is that while the judge denied Justin's team the chance to serve her lawyer directly, he made it clear that Isabella cannot simply hide forever, that playing what the court described as a game of Where's Waldo will not work in the long run. The legal system demands more than excuses, it demands proof, diligence, effort, and ultimately confrontation. And that is where Justin's side faltered. Because as the ruling revealed, the judge was not willing to just take them at their word, not willing to accept what he called a trust me, bro. Defense instead, he demanded receipts. He demanded a demonstration that Wayfarer Productions had truly exhausted every possible avenue to serve Isabella, and when they failed to provide that proof, the ruling became a double-edged sword. On the one hand, Isabella is still locked in this battle, unable to simply vanish. But on the other, Justin's team is now under pressure, forced to prove that their attempts were real, valid, and rooted in diligence, not in laziness or assumption. And the irony of it all is that the evidence they could have produced was likely right under their noses, because, as the judge pointed out, this was a major studio production. Travel arrangements were made, contracts were signed, payments were processed, someone somewhere had Isabella's address on file, a driver picked her up, a ticket was purchased, a license submitted, the paperwork exists. Yet none of that was provided to the court. Instead, they showed only two flimsy attempts, two weak affidavits that left the judge unimpressed and unwilling to give them the benefit of the doubt. And in that gap, in that failure, lies the heart of this drama, because it raises questions not just about due diligence, but about strategy, about narrative, about who is truly evading and who is truly playing games. Isabella may be avoiding service, but Justin's team, by failing to produce stronger evidence, now risks being painted as manipulative, as trying to twist the optics to make her look worse than she is. And this is why the ruling matters so much, because it doesn't end the battle. It simply sets the stage for the next round around, where Wayfarer Productions must return to the judge, armed with real evidence, real proof that they tried to reach her, that they truly knocked on every door and dialed every number. And if they fail again, the implications will be devastating for Justin's case, because it will show the court that perhaps they are not as thorough as they claim, and perhaps they are leaning too heavily on the narrative that Isabella is hiding, when in reality, they simply have not done the work. And yet here lies the dramatic twist. The judge left the door open without prejudice, meaning Justin's team can try again, can attempt once more to make their case, which means Isabella has not escaped. She has only delayed the inevitable, because sooner or later the subpoena will find her. The questions will be asked and the answers will be demanded. And when that moment comes, what will she say? Will she align with Justin? Will she shield Blake? Will she tell a story that shifts the balance of this entire war? Or will she refuse to play either side and risk being crushed by both? Because in Hollywood, silence is never truly neutral. It is interpreted twisted, weaponized, and Isabella's silence thus far has already become a weapon in itself. The judge's ruling also raised another haunting issue: duplication. Because if Blake Lively has already secured certain testimony from Isabella through her own subpoenas, then Justin's demands risk being labeled redundant, burdensome, even harassing. And that is a danger that cannot be ignored, because the judge hinted that if this overlap exists, then this cost falls on Justin's side. They must pay, they must tread carefully, and they must ensure they are not simply asking for what Blake has already taken. And this revelation turns the entire situation into a high-wire act where one misstep could cost everything. And the most chilling part of all is the way this legal chess game mirrors the public relations war outside the courtroom. Isabella, a rising actress, a castmate on It Ends With Us, finds herself transformed from supporting role to critical witness, her future now tied not to the film she acted in, but to the subpoenas and rulings that surround it. And the whispers in Hollywood grow louder every day, because no one can ignore the symbolism: a young star caught between Blake Lively, the seasoned Hollywood power player, and Justin Baldoni, the embattled director fighting for his reputation. And in that symbolism lies the tragedy. Isabella never asked for this yet. Now she is the test case, the proof of whether the system works, whether subpoenas can be enforced or evaded, whether truth can be compelled or hidden, and every delay, every ruling, every affidavit fuels the fire of speculation. What does she know? Why is she resisting? And what will happen when she finally speaks? And so this first ruling, though procedural on the surface, is actually a bombshell. In disguise, it reveals not only the tension between diligence and evasion, but also the cracks in Justin's legal strategy, and the growing sense that this case will not be won with one decisive blow, but through countless skirmishes, procedural battles, and tactical maneuvers, each one carrying enormous weight, and each one shaping the narrative that will define this scandal for years to come. And as the gavel fell and the ruling was read, the unspoken message was clear: Isabella, you cannot hide forever. Justin, you must prove your case. And Blake, the storm around you is only growing darker, because the truth has not yet been told. And when it finally emerges, it will shake everything to the core. The courtroom atmosphere had barely settled from the earlier revelations when the focus shifted with almost surgical precision onto the so-called whistleblower, the figure whose declaration had been paraded by Blake Lively's camp as if it were gospel truth. The one thing they could hold up and say, look, this proves Justin Baldoni is toxic. This proves we were right all along. But as the layers began to peel away, the truth was anything but clean. And the man at the center of it all began to look less like a heroic truth-teller and more like a pawn who had been used, discarded, and left vulnerable to the very system he thought he was exposing. Because what we saw was not just a single contradiction, but a web of inconsistencies, a trail of whispers and shadows that painted a picture of manipulation on both sides. And as the attorneys circled him like vultures, the cracks widened until it became clear that this testimony was never solid, never bulletproof, but fragile from the start. And now, under the weight of scrutiny, it was breaking apart piece by piece, word by word, leaving behind only confusion and suspicion. The declaration, on paper, had sounded dramatic enough to command attention, claiming he had overheard whispers of discontent, rumors that the cast of It Ends With Us had soured on Baldoni, that the atmosphere had been poisoned by his very presence. But when pressed in court about the source of these claims, his answers revealed the hollowness at the core, admitting that much of it was secondhand, gossip recycled from conversations he could not even fully place. And at one point, it descended into the absurd as the judge himself leaned forward and asked point blank whether he had any concrete evidence to support the sweeping accusations. And the man paused, visibly unsettled, before muttering words that would haunt the proceeding. Trust me, bro. Words that might work in an internet forum or a half-baked tabloid column. But in the sanctity of a courtroom, under oath, they landed. Like a self-inflicted wound, a signal flare that this testimony was not rooted in verifiable truth but in fragile perception, rumor, and perhaps even subtle pressure. Because lurking beneath the surface was the darker implication that he had not come forward entirely of his own volition, that there had been nudges, that Blake's team or those connected to her publicist Leslie Sloan had applied the kind of pressure that doesn't leave a paper trail, but can twist a man's judgment all the same. And as Justin Baldoni's attorneys zeroed in, they framed him not as a villain, but as another casualty in a larger game, someone weaponized and then discarded when his usefulness expired. What made the drama sting even more was the Daily Mail connection, because this whistleblower, whose identity once carried the credibility of being tied to media circles, now appeared entangled with the same machinery that Leslie Sloan was accused of manipulating. The same pipeline of gossip and targeted narrative shaping that had already been traced back to attempts to smear Baldoni during production. And suddenly the room was forced to confront an uncomfortable possibility: that the so-called declaration had not been an independent act of conscience at all, but a calculated move designed to inflict reputational harm with the faintest veneer of legitimacy. Isabella Faraher's absence only intensified the suspicion, because her refusal to comply with subpoenas, her constant dodging of the process server, her insistence on staying out of the mess while her name was whispered again and again as someone who could confirm or deny the most crucial points, made the entire spectacle feel like a thriller where the key witness has fled the scene, leaving behind only silence, unanswered questions, and a legal team desperate to keep her shielded from the light. The judge, clearly irritated by the games, made it clear that avoidance could only last so long, that subpoenas are not suggestions but orders, and that while she may have succeeded in delaying her testimony for now, the day would come when her silence would no longer protect her, and that looming inevitability added a chilling undertone to the entire proceeding, as if everyone in the room knew that the real fireworks had not even begun. What made this chapter so electrifying was the sense of unraveling, the feeling that every revelation about the whistleblower's contradictions and Isabella's evasions pulled another thread loose in Blake Lively's carefully woven narrative, and as the tapestry frayed, the public watching from afar began to question whether this was ever about truth or justice at all, or if it was always about power, control, and survival in an industry that rewards the ruthless and discards the weak. And the man once presented as a brave truth-teller now stood revealed as collateral damage. A reminder that in this war, even those who believe they are acting with conviction can find themselves chewed up by forces far larger than they ever imagined. The foundation of Blake Lively's case with the contradictions of the whistleblower and Isabella Faraher's evasions, then what unfolded next was nothing short of a demolition, and at the center of the wrecking ball stood Leslie Sloan, the longtime Hollywood publicist whose name has lingered like smoke in the background of every twist and turn. A shadowy presence tied to planted articles, whispers funneled into tabloids, and the unmistakable fingerprints of a smear campaign designed to cripple Justin Baldoni's credibility before the film even hit theaters. Because as soon as the lawyers turned their attention toward her, the courtroom seemed to grow heavier, more electric, as if everyone understood that this was the nerve center of the entire scandal. And what was revealed painted a portrait not of routine publicity management, but of targeted destruction dressed up as strategy. Testimony and documents suggested that Sloan's reach extended beyond mere PR spin. It was about weaponizing narrative, feeding carefully curated leaks into outlets like the Daily Mail and Page 6, crafting a perception of Baldoni as difficult, controlling, even toxic, all while ensuring Blake Lively remained untouched by the fallout, a golden figure elevated above the chaos. And yet, under cross-examination, the veneer cracked, because once emails were introduced hinting at coordination between Sloan's office and certain gossip writers, it became increasingly difficult to maintain the fiction that this was coincidence or organic reporting. The betrayal angle sharpened with every revelation, because Hollywood operates on trust and alliances, and to see that Sloan, someone supposedly there to protect, had allegedly turned the machinery of the media into a weapon for character assassination made it feel less like PR and more like psychological warfare. And suddenly Blake's hands didn't look as clean as her lawyers wanted the public to believe. For Baldoni, this was vindication wrapped in tragedy, because here was evidence that the storm surrounding his name may not have been born from his actions at all, but from an orchestrated campaign designed to preemptively bury him, and the betrayal extended beyond him personally to the very fabric of the production. Because how could a cast and crew function in an environment where gossip and narrative manipulation were being piped in from outside with surgical precision, seeding doubt before trust could even take root? What made this betrayal sting deeper still was the awareness that this was not just about one film or one scandal, but about the way power operates in Hollywood, how figures like Sloan can pull strings behind the curtain, shaping careers and destroying reputations with nothing more than a phone call to the right journalist or a whisper in the right ear. And as Baldoni's legal team peeled back the curtain, the court was forced to look into an abyss that many knew. existed but few dared to acknowledge out loud. And here was the twist of irony. Sloan's strategy, meant to shield Blake and demolish Baldoni, had become evidence of manipulation so brazen that it threatened to backfire completely, not only undermining Blake's credibility, but also casting her as complicit in a scheme that reeked of desperation, rather than defense. The betrayal narrative only deepened when it became clear that certain allies of Blake, perhaps even Reynolds in the background, had distanced themselves from Sloan as whispers of her tactics began to surface, suggesting that even inside Blake's own circle there were fractures, people unwilling to be tethered to a publicist whose methods, once effective, now looked like a liability in the unforgiving glare of a courtroom. What the public saw, and what the media couldn't resist amplifying, was the image of a Hollywood star once thought untouchable, suddenly dragged into the mud by the very hands that had once polished her image. Because Sloan's playbook, so reliant on secrecy and back-channeling, was now being read aloud in open court, dissected line by line, turning a private arsenal into public spectacle, and with every headline the betrayal widened. Betrayal of Baldoni. Betrayal of the audience who thought they were witnessing authentic stories rather than manufactured feuds. Betrayal of the cast who had unknowingly been dragged into a chess game played far above their heads, and perhaps most cuttingly, betrayal of Blake herself. Because while Sloan's methods may have been designed to protect her, the revelation of those methods had the opposite effect, tethering her reputation to schemes that felt underhanded, manipulative, and dangerously close to defamatory. And this is where the theme of betrayal became all-consuming, because it wasn't just Sloan betraying Baldoni, or Blake betraying her co-stars, but the system itself betraying everyone who believed in the illusion of fairness, because what the court proceedings revealed was a machinery that rewards ruthlessness and punishes sincerity, a system where truth becomes secondary to spin, and where loyalty lasts only as long as it serves a purpose. In this sense, the Sloan revelations weren't just about one case, but about exposing the rot at the heart of an industry that survives by eating its own. And as journalists outside the courthouse scrambled to capture the mood, phrases like smear campaign and betrayal dominated the airwaves, turning what should have been a straightforward legal skirmish into a cultural reckoning. One where the public could no longer ignore the ugly reality that their idols were not just performers, but combatants in a ceaseless war fought through gossip columns and leaked emails. The betrayal stung doubly for Taylor Swift's name being dragged in, because whispers of texts and private exchanges hinted at how even friendships were collateral damage in the battle, how even loyalty between women so publicly celebrated could be fractured by the invisible hand of PR manipulation. And while Swift herself remained silent, the speculation that her communications might be exposed only amplified the sense that no one was safe, that everyone in this circle was vulnerable to betrayal whether they realized it or not. The longer Sloan's tactics were aired, the clearer. It became that what we were witnessing was not just the collapse of a legal argument, but the collapse of trust itself. The kind of collapse that once it happens can never fully be repaired, because the knowledge of betrayal lingers like poison, altering how every gesture and word is interpreted moving forward. And so by the time the court recessed that day, the story was no longer about who was right or wrong in a contractual dispute, but about how betrayal had become the defining currency of this entire saga, a currency that could not be unspent, leaving everyone poorer, wounded, and permanently marked by the exposure of truths that were never meant to see daylight. And so we are left standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the chaos of a battle that has no clear winner, a battle where reputations are being shredded, careers are hanging by a thread, and the truth itself is buried under layers of strategy, manipulation, and fear. Blake Lively's co-star Isabella Faraher may have escaped a subpoena for now, but the judge made it clear she cannot hide forever. Justin Baldoni's team may have stumbled with their diligence, but the door is still wide open for another strike. And when it comes, it could shake the foundation of this case. Even further, the whistleblower who once stood as a shield of truth has now been discarded, like collateral damage, fired from his job, threatened from every direction, and yet still holding pieces of a puzzle that could destroy everything if fully revealed. Leslie Sloan, once believed to be a master strategist, may now find herself exposed in the harshest light. Her words, her moves, her attempts to steer the media narrative now sitting in black and white proof that can no longer be denied. And Hollywood is watching closely, terrified of what may come next, because if this can happen to Blake, if her team can be caught tangled in contradictions and whispers, what hope is there for anyone else? This is no longer just a legal fight. It is a War for survival in the court of public opinion, and the final chapter has not yet been written. Every player is wounded, every truth is questioned, and every step forward could lead to collapse. The story is still unraveling, and the next twist could arrive at any moment.